Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the La Bologna Valley Bromeliad Society Zoom presentation featuring Mr. George Stamatis. I'm Ken Simpson, the Vice President, and we welcome our members and guests. Thank you all for joining. On this Zoom presentation, Paul Nakamura has now muted all participants for this presentation. Adjust the view on your screen in your Zoom window for either speaker or gallery. Our speaker will take questions after his presentation. He will tell you when he is ready for your questions. You may unmute yourself for your question only. When finished, mute yourself. The La Bologna Valley Bromeliad Society Club affairs will be discussed after the presentation. If you would like to receive announcements of our future meetings, please email your name to what is on the screen. I'll give you a moment to write it down. We thank you, George, for the time and effort you put into your presentation for us tonight. George was born in a small coastal town in South Africa in the late 1970s to Greek Cypriot parents. George completed primary and secondary school and a 3-year national diploma in horticulture at the Durban Institute of Technology in South Africa. In 2001, at 22 years old, he went to James Cook University in Townsville, Australia as an international student and then obtained his Bachelor of Science in Botany. George became an Australian citizen and settled in Elimbah, Queensland, where he has established a collector's nursery, Elimbah Tropicals, and also teaches high school. His love of nature began in his childhood in South Africa, and while a child, he developed many interests, including freshwater fish, bromeliads, tropical ferns, palms, and all tropical plants. It was a visit to a local open garden with great displays of bromeliads growing epiphytically alongside the tropical plantings designed in harmony with the natural rainforest that really got him hooked on this hobby. Epiphytes captured George's fascination, and this garden started his bromeliad collection. The owner of the open garden referred George to Nigel Thompson, who lived in South Africa at the time and had the finest collection of bromeliads in the country. As a youngster, George would frequently visit Nigel's nursery to acquire plants where Nigel's wife, Rosalie, would try her best to help him with George's endless questions. While in high school, George began hybridizing, importing seed from Brazil and importing plants from the USA. George and his parents also spent many years collaborating to create a beautiful tropical garden on his parents' land. For the last 10 years, George has been importing many new and exciting bromeliads and other plants into Australia from around the world, and has also imported much of his South African plant collection into Australia. All of Trevor's kindness in allowing George to utilize her quarantine facility made this possible. In the last 10 years, George has also been very actively engaged in raising bromeliads from seed, including an extensive hybridization program. Much of George's hybridization work has been inspired by the incredible work of the late John Arden, the world-renowned bromeliad hybridizer from our area here in Southern California, USA. George has also drawn inspiration from the work of world-renowned Vriesea hybridizer David Shigi from Hawaii. In the bromeliad world, George's main interests are in the genera Vriesea, Tillandsia, Dickia, Hohenbergia, and intergenetic hybrids of the Tillandsioideae family. George also enjoys maintaining pure species and cultivation for conservation purposes. The LBVBS is a nonprofit organization. The presenters, members, and video producers are not financially compensated for these presentations. Attendance at our Zoom presentations is free to all bromeliad enthusiasts. Donations can be made to offset our Zoom presentation costs using PayPal. The following 2 slides will show the PayPal website link and then the screen scan code. Either one can be used if you'd like to support our efforts. So you may use your phone camera and take a picture of the PayPal link, or you can scan this link with your camera, and the QR code below is useful for making a donation. We thank you very much for joining us tonight and look forward to George's presentation. Hope you all enjoy it.
All right, so before we start the talk on Vrieseas today, there was a request from Barry that I do a general introduction, just to introduce you all to the part of the world where I live and what our growing conditions are like. And also that I would do a small section about my Vriesea hybridizing work. So I'll get into that now first. So a general introduction, where in the world am I? Well, as you can read, I am in a town that's called Ilimba. It's in the state of Queensland. It's on the east coast of Australia. And we are fairly far inland. Climate-wise, we are subtropical, and we have most of our rain in summer. We have a pretty generous amount of rain, usually around 6 feet of rain, but some years we can have much less if we're in drought, and other years we can have a lot more. In the southern hemisphere, we're at a similar latitude to Santa Catarina in Brazil, and in the northern hemisphere, we're somewhere around West Palm Beach or Fort Myers, just to give you some idea. So there's a world map, and if you look over to the bottom right, you can see Australia, and there's a little red star showing my location, and we just zoom in a little bit more. So there's Brisbane, and then just slightly north of Brisbane is Ilimba, and then above that I've got the Tropic of Capricorn indicated for you. Just on this note, when we get into the Vriesea talk later on, there are some references to some acronyms. Now, the acronyms are SEQ, which stands for Southeast Queensland. So SEQ, or Southeast Queensland, hopefully you can see my little arrow, is sort of this area around here. So it includes the greater Brisbane area, so Brisbane north to the Sunshine Coast, south to the Gold Coast, and inland to about Toowoomba. So that's SEQ, Southeast Queensland. It's fairly similar climatically. The other acronym you will see in the Vriesea talk is FNQ, Far North Queensland, which is this area up here around Cairns, which is very tropical, more tropical even than Hilo, Hawaii, and it's a generally very wet area. So their growing conditions are very different to ours. The reason I have those acronyms in the Vriesea talk is because I originally designed the Vriesea talk to cater to a Queensland, Australia audience. So that's what the acronyms mean when we see them later in the Vriesea talk. Just some pictures of the local countryside where I live. So this is up in the hills and mountains. And there's quite a few volcanic formations in the area. At higher elevation, it's a lot wetter and you tend to get subtropical rainforest. As you come down to lower elevation, still get good rainfall, but it's a lot drier compared to the mountaintops, and you get a lot of more open vegetation. Sometimes you get koalas, which are really nice to see. Beautiful beaches. And that's the city of Brisbane, which is my nearest major city. It's about an hour away from where I live. My collection itself mostly consists of the genus Tillandsia and the genus Vriesea, many species, as well as hybrids. In terms of hybrids, the Vriesea hybrids I grow are mostly Australian or my own homemade Australian hybrids. I also like the Hawaiian hybrids and the Arden hybrids. I do keep as many New Zealand hybrids as possible, but I find, well, we all find them quite hard to grow here. They don't enjoy the higher temperatures, the New Zealand hybrids. They tend to prefer cooler weather. Even though they're derived from the same species as all the other hybrids, I think it's just that they've been developed over so many generations in the New Zealand climate that they can't handle warm, tropical conditions. In terms of Tillandsia hybrids, again, I like a lot of Australian hybrids, including my own homemade hybrids, and I particularly like Californian hybrids from Arden, from Pam, from Paul Isley, from Dimmitt. I find those hybrids are really, really beautiful, and they do really well here. A few photos of my collection, focusing again mostly on the areas where the Vrieseas are grown, not the other genera, because the topic of the talk today is Vriesea. So the area you can see there is one of the areas where I grow my hybrid seedlings out to maturity, so that I can fully assess them for whether they're worthy of registration or not. Again, that's another view of the seedling growing out area. And you can see several different ranges of hybrids there growing out in batches for me to select out the best ones. Again, another area where you can see a lot of younger seedlings in the background. And in the foreground, you can see a large branched spike. That's an intergeneric hybrid between a Vriesea and a Tillandsia that I produced some years ago. On this bench, you can see a mixture of different hybrids. You can see that quite clearly that they're all different crosses. And these are heading towards the final stages of where I select which ones are worth registering and which ones aren't. So out of this bench, to give you some idea of which ones ended up being registered, hopefully you can see the little cursor, the little white arrow buzzing around. On this bench, the ones that ended up getting registered was this red one here, this peachy colored one here, 2, this one, 3, 4, and yeah, that's about it. So it's a very selective process. This apricot colored one back here, I'm still assessing. I think I probably will register it, but everything you see here is less than 1% of all the hybrids I made in that particular year. And then of that 1%, just that little handful end up making the cut, the final cut for being worthy of registration. So how do I make a hybrid? You've got to wait for the plants to mature. And once they mature, they produce their flower spikes. And this can take anything from 5 to 10 years, depending on the variety. You pollinate the flowers at night because that's when the flowers are open. So you can see the flower spike here on the right, and you can see some flowers open. And if I zoom in on the flowers, you can see the stigmas and you can see the stamens. And I go around with my headlamp at night and I pollinate. And my neighbors probably think that they're living next door to an absolute lunatic. But anyway, it's fine. The next day, I tag the flowers with the parentage details because it's very important to know who pollinated who. That's important. It's important to know the parentage of a cross, not only when you're growing the seedlings, because it guides what your expectation of the cross is, but it's also important to know the parentage in case you decide to use that cross you've created in further hybridizing. And knowing that the parentage involved allows you to make better choices as a breeder as to what to breed with what for the results you're trying to achieve. Anyway, after you've pollinated those individual flowers, you can make one different cross on each flower if you like, and each pollinated flower, if successfully pollinated, will gradually turn into a big green seed pod. And the seed pods ripen in 6 to 12 months. And when the pods are ripe, you can crack them open and there's all this fluffy seed inside. So that if you look here, if the cursor, the seed is this long brown segment, and then all the fluff that's attached is a parachute. And in nature, that helps to disperse the seed. So I plant the seed in an incubator-like environment with bottom heat. The reason why I have bottom heat, even though we live in a warm climate, is I find Vriesea seeds for us tend to end up ripening right in the middle of our winter, where it is a bit cool at night. And that would slow down germination, and you may also not get 100% germination. So I use bottom heat to speed things up through the winter and also to ensure the highest possible germination rate. So on the left, you can see seeds that have just been planted. In the middle, you can see seeds that are about 3 months old and the little seedlings are growing. This is still inside the incubator with the lid on and the bottom heat on. And then on the right, you can see seedlings that are about 5, 6 months old. Now, when they get to that sort of stage of development, I start to lift the lid of the incubator for a few hours a day. And I gradually increase the amount of time that the lid is off the incubator, and that's to acclimatize the seedlings to our normal atmospheric conditions. And eventually the lid comes off completely 24/7. And once they show that they've acclimatized, I usually use like an egg flipper to lift the seeds up, seedlings up off the mix in the incubator and place them on top of trays filled with the adult potting mix and some controlled release fertilizer to grow them on. And I grow them till this sort of stage, which is another 12 to 24 months time. And in these trays, you can see all the little white name tags. Each of those name tags shows you that that's one different cross, that's a different cross, that's a different cross, and so on. So as you can see, lots of different crosses. This is not even one little corner of the seedling area. So I've got major issues, you know, a lot of seedlings coming along. Once they get to this stage and they're overcrowded, you've got to split them up again or you'll start losing them. So I divide them and I spread them into bigger trays until they're about 3 to 5 years old. So the ones you see in the photo now are around 3 years of age. And this is where they start to show their unique characteristics. You can easily distinguish some of the different crosses here, like this tray with a lot of whites and pinks is very distinct from all the others. So this is where they start to show their the first hints of their possible adult characteristics. And you can actually start culling even at this early stage. But culling isn't a once-off. It happens continuously throughout the growing on process till you get the finished plant that you want. So here, some of the things I look for at the very early stage, the 3 to 5 year mark, is things like vigor or strength. That's a very important criteria to me. I pick the strongest seedlings with the most vigor. So if you look at the picture on the left, all these seedlings are of the same cross. They're all of exactly the same age. They were planted in the tray at the same time. Yet this one in the middle of all of them is way ahead of the others in its development, and it's far more vigorous. So that one would get picked out for sure and potted on. It's not to say I discard the rest. There may still be some very good ones there, but that lead seedling would be potted on for sure. And I usually label it as leader so that I can keep track. I know that that was the vigorous one. And they tend to end up bigger and stronger in the end. Sometimes there is no distinct lead seedling. So you see these white ones on the bottom left, they're all pretty similar in their vigor. So, and these purpley pink ones in the middle, the same story. Sometimes you don't get a lead seedling. And the ones on the right, the same thing. In that case, you just pick out the ones that are showing the best color. I have a scoring system out of 10, which factors in vigor as well as color and form and pattern and a whole lot of other criteria. And if the seedlings at any culling stage score less than 7 out of 10, I dump them on the heap and they become compost for the garden. The reason I do that, as wasteful as it may seem, remember you're creating a hybrid. So the original pure species is being sacrificed and lost to create a hybrid. So unless the hybrid is something truly remarkable or a real improvement, why bother growing it? So that's why I cull if they're less than 7 out of 10. Only grow the hybrids if they are exceptional and really good. Otherwise, you're better off keeping just the pure species going. That's just my opinion. Others may have a different opinion. So here we're working towards the final stages of culling. So these seedlings now are at the 5 to 7 year mark. Still haven't got to the end of culling, but you can see they're more advanced again. And it never stops till you get to the final cull. A few other interesting things you notice when you're breeding is the range of results you get. So this hybrid at the bottom left, that's what we call a primary hybrid. It's a hybrid between two pure species. So species A crossed with species B. And when you create a primary hybrid, the results tend to be very consistent. The majority of the seedlings look near identical. Then you look at this batch of seedlings on the right, that's a complex hybrid. It's the result of crossing one hybrid with another hybrid. So there's a lot more mix up of the genetics, and those are from one seed pod, and look at the variation there. So the more complex the genetics, the more complex the result is going to be, and the more variation you're going to get. And so these now are also growing on, deciding whether they're going to be worthy of registration or not. And so it goes on and on until you get to the end product. So these are a few, just photos of just a few hybrids that I decided scored 10 out of 10. And they have it all. They're hardy, they've got good vigor, they've got good color, good form, good pattern. If I bred them for the inflorescence, they've got a good inflorescence with good shape, good color, long lasting, etc. They have it all. And they then get registered with the BCR, which is the Bromeliad Cultivar Registry. So when I register a hybrid, what my approach is that I only register a particular clone. So I'll go back 2 slides, and I'll use this batch here of complex hybrids as an example. They're all siblings. They're all from the same cross, the same mother, the same father, and they're out of the same seed pod. If I decided to register this purple one here, I would give it a name, let's say Purple Passion. That registered name on the Bromeliad Cultivar Registry, if it was me as a hybridizer, would apply only to that particular purple plant and its direct descendants propagated from offsets from the original. I would not call one of the other siblings in that hybrid by the same registered name because they're not the same clone as that one. Why do I do that? Well, they're clearly different. And also I think, what about my customers one day, or my name as a hybridizer? If someone sees a photo of the registered plant on the BCR and orders that hybrid from me, let's say, and I sell them something with the same name as the hybrid, but it's a sibling, and it grows out to be clearly different, well, I don't think my customer is going to be very happy, and I don't think I'm going to have a good name as a breeder for very long. So when I register something on the BCR, that name applies just to one clone from that cross, or that particular clone and its direct descendants. I don't give the registered name to the entire batch. And that's my nursery, Ilimba Tropicals. I currently don't have a website, but I do have a Facebook page for the nursery where I conduct my sales. And the photos you can see there are a few photos showing the layout of my sales and advertisements on the website. You can also see the link to the Facebook page there. I don't routinely sell plants outside of Australia at this point. I have done some international orders, but at this point, how I'm currently set up, it's more for Australian orders only. However, I do have a long-term view to release my plants worldwide. I'm just, when I get to that point of having enough stock to do that, I'd be looking for nurseries in different countries or regions in the world who are willing to import from me a big batch. and then they can on-sell them and distribute them to collectors in their own country, and that would save the average collector all the importing hassles. So that's the way I would prefer to do it down the track. It's easier for me that way because I'm doing one export to cover one whole country. And I think it's also better for the collector because you don't have to deal with all the import and quarantine of your country. You leave that up to the distributor and you just mail order from them and your plant arrives with no fuss. So that's my long-term view. And that's the introduction done. So let's move on to the Vriesea presentation. Okay, so it should be full screen now. It should say My Secrets to Growing Beautiful Foliage Vrieseas.
You got it.
Okay, great. Okay, so this Vriesea talk itself is mainly going to be exactly that. I'm going to be, sharing from my experience over the years how to grow foliage Vrieseas really well. So a quick overview of the talk. It's going to be choosing the right Vriesea for your climate, their climatic preferences, light, temperature, water, feeding, a bit of information about their root systems, potting medium, seasonal change, pests and diseases, best practice and ongoing maintenance, propagation, and then there'll be a whole section at the end with lots of beautiful plants to look at. So a lot of the principles in this talk are applicable to all other kinds of plants, not just Vrieseas and bromeliads. So I'm not going to read word for word what's on the slides because a lot of this is already in those in that PDF document. So if you're new to growing Vrieseas and you're not sure, which ones are best for your local conditions, the best thing to do, there's two things you should always do. Look at the natural habitat that particular Vriesea comes from, if it's a species, or if it's a hybrid, look at the habitat its parents come from. Use that as a guide for what sort of conditions it's likely to require. Also speak to local collectors who are already growing Vrieseas or similar plants and ask them how they're doing it. So this is just a little chart that I've prepared, which is in the PDF document, and this one applies to species. And it's based on a mixture of their natural habitat as well as my experience growing them in cultivation. And it just tells you what sort of conditions they like. So that's something you can refer to later. And these are some of the species that a lot of the modern hybrids are bred from. It's quite amazing, to think that from these species we have all these different hybrids. And then again, some climatic preferences for commonly grown hybrids. I've again based this on experience over the last 10 or so years, not just my own experience, but the experience of other Vriesea growers in the area. So we've found, as it says in the chart, Hawaiian Vriesea hybrids generally prefer tropical or intermediate conditions. Californian hybrids, Vriesea hybrids, so mainly from John Arden, I find that they are tolerant of just about any conditions and they're really tough. New Zealand foliage Vrieseas, they generally prefer it a bit on the cool side. The moment the temperatures start to get a bit tropical, the New Zealand Vrieseas generally, not always, but generally are very unhappy. So that is a limitation for the New Zealand Vrieseas if you live in a warm part of the world. Hybrids from New South Wales, which is a state in Australia, again, are generally quite tolerant of a range of conditions. Queensland, Australian Vriesea hybrids, again, the same thing, tolerant of a wide range of conditions. And then at the bottom, it says hybrids with day flowering species in their ancestry. So what I mean there is the non-pattern leaf Vrieseas, the ones that you see produced by a lot of the European tissue culture companies that have the beautiful inflorescence, but plain green leaves. Those are the day flowering types. So there are some pattern leaf Vrieseas that have the day flowering species in their ancestry some way. And we found that if that is the case, it often makes the progeny a lot stronger for some reason, and they will also tolerate a wider range of conditions. So that will also help you in choosing the right Vriesea hybrid or species for your conditions. So there's a range of my hybrids all displayed together. Now, when it comes to light, again, just speak to your local growers about what they do. The advice I've put in here is more for Southeast Queensland. We use white 50% shade cloth, and we have various toppers of black 30 or 50% shade cloth for summer, when the light can get quite intense. It's a matter of really talking to your local growers and see what works best. The most important thing, make sure your shade cloth is as high above the plants as possible, so that there's room for any accumulated heat during the daytime to not reach the actual leaves of the plants. If you've got the shade cloth right above the plants, they're more likely to be exposed to that heat buildup in the top of your shade structure and get roasted. The FNQ at the bottom is far north Queensland. That's the tropical zone, so don't worry about that one, just disregard. Okay, temperature-wise, so again, refer to those slides from before about their climate and temperature preferences, but what I have found is the majority of Vriesea species, they do like a bit of a cool-off at night. Even in the middle of summer, when it's stinking hot and humid during the day, they do like it if there's a bit of a shower or a storm in the afternoon to cool them off. If they don't get that cool-off at night, they don't seem to be quite as happy. The only exception is Vriesea fenestralis. I find it's very tropical compared to the others. So that's a photo showing you what heat damage on a Vriesea would look like, or can look like. So what usually happens if you have a heat wave is the first thing you'll notice is what's here on the left. You get all these little marks that almost look like a rust infection on the leaf. That's usually the beginning. And then what will eventually happen is it turns into big burnt areas like what you'll see on the plant on the right. That's if you haven't got adequate shading in summer, and then you'll get sunburn. So that's how to recognize sunburn or heat damage on your plants. Okay, water I find is the most important factor in my experience with growing Vrieseas. You've got to have good quality water. Rainwater is best, or reverse osmosis water. Town water is a little bit of a gamble. It depends on what your local supply is like. Unfortunately, where I am, the local town water has caused in the past very serious problems where I threw away thousands of plants. And I will never, I've switched to 100% rainwater. And it's improved results dramatically in all my plants, not just the Vrieseas. I just want to show you, recognize problems as a result of bad water. Okay, so just give it a moment for the images to load up. Okay, can everyone see that image? Is everyone there?
Yes.
Yep, okay.
Start.
So what you, sorry.
Go ahead.
On Barry. In that image, what you'll notice is the inner, you can see the symmetry in the way the new leaves are emerging. The symmetry is a little bit out of whack. It's not the way it should be. That's usually your first indication that something's not quite right. Something's brewing, you know? And then usually the next thing you'll notice is the leaves will start to pull out, and then this odorless, it continues and progresses. The plant tries to grow and recover again. It'll grow and then it'll rot. And months later, you have what you see right here on the right. The plant just never comes good. It'll try to throw pups, and they develop the same thing. That's what happens if you've got bad town water. I find if you're using groundwater, leaf axils instead, where the lower leaf axils will go very brown and there'll be a lot of mineral buildup, and you'll get rot starting from the base of the plant, working its way inwards. that tends to be from groundwater. There are all sorts of other undesirable chemicals. Seems to work the other way down. So water quality, very important.
Your audio seems to be.
Since I switched to, yes?
Your audio seems to be breaking up a bit. I don't know what's causing it.
All right. It could just be the quality of the connection. I'm just checking, and I'm still.
Yeah, it's a connection
connected. Quality
problem.
Do I need to repeat anything that it said? Connection.
We hear a lot of pinging noises.
We just lost.
Some of the benefits. Pinging noises. Am I still visible on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, but we're just getting strange digitization of the audio. It's okay. Just go ahead.
Could try turning his video off to decrease the bandwidth.
Oh, there's an idea. Okay, how do I do that? Stop video?
Yep.
All right. So let's see. So these are just some of the improvements I've noticed since using better water. You get better plant vigor,
Damn it.
better color. Plants are also go for longer. Is it not working?
If it clicks in and out.
Connecting and then reconnecting to the internet and coming back into the meeting. What would you like me to do?
Barry, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with George. I think it has to do with his carrier, with his internet service provider. I don't have any thoughts. I wish I did.
Maybe it's part of the rain issue. Why don't you keep going? If it's a bigger problem, maybe you could go out and come back in. I don't know.
Okay. I can hear you guys perfectly on my end. So. Okay. So those are just some healthy plants, thriving with good quality water. You've got to be wary of pathogens in your water supply, more so if you're using water from a creek or a river or a dam. This is more of an issue. In such cases, you've got to look at filtration, etc. I don't advise using water from a creek or a dam or a river on Vrieseas. You're better off sticking with rainwater or reverse osmosis water. Okay, is the sound quality a bit better now?
Yes.
It is. Okay, good. Okay, so watering frequency and sprinkler selection. So what I've got here is based more again on our local conditions. We can sometimes get summers here where we don't get our wet season. So last summer was an example of that, where we didn't have a wet season and we had drought and heat instead. So I always opt for sprinklers that are low output. So it might take longer to fully saturate the plants, but what happens when you've got low output sprinklers, the plants have all their leaf surfaces wet for longer and cool for longer. So it gives them a longer period of relief and recovery from a really hot, dry summer day. So that's why I opt for the low output sprinklers. They still get saturated, but it might take them 2 hours of very light sprinkling as opposed to 5 minutes of drenching. I think there's more benefit in the plants to have a slow, gradual hydration, especially after a hot summer. Feeding is very important. So initial feeding, that's for establishment if you're planting a pup or a seedling. Vrieseas like a good helping of food to get them established. And so I usually pick an Osmocote or another kind of slow release fertilizer or controlled release fertilizer that will feed the offset or seedling for 12 to 14 months. And then some Vriesea hybrids have or Vriesea species too have a very long lifespan of many years, in which case you may want to apply light feeding every spring just to keep them looking good throughout their life. It depends on the lifespan of what you're growing. I just want to talk about these two graphs. Hopefully you can see them. This is to do with the release pattern of your fertilizer, and this should be displayed on the packaging. Now, on the left, you can see an exponential graph where the rate of fertilizer release gets higher and higher and higher over time. And then on the right, you can see a graph where the rate of fertilizer release is constant over time. The one where you've got a constant release is much better for Vrieseas. So what happens is you've got day 0 when you plant the seedling or the offset, and the fertilizer will then release at a constant rate for 12 to 14 months to support a good growth rate. And then when it reaches that point and the fertilizer has all then been used up and the plant is established, the fertilizer runs out, your plant's established, and then the color starts to intensify. So I find this on the right, this release pattern and this length of time ties in a lot better with the life cycle of a Vriesea than other kinds of fertilizers. This also works well for Tillandsias, Guzmanias, Alcantarias. I wouldn't use it for Neurogelias though. I think you want something for them that's a lot, that gets used up a lot more quickly. Anyway, so that's a very important thing to note, is the feeding side of things. Healthy roots are very important as well. I find if you can keep your Vriesea's root systems very healthy, then it eliminates a lot of other problems. And that comes down to the potting medium. So I know that the kind of potting medium available varies quite a lot depending on where in the world people are situated. So you've got to work with what's available for you. Where I am, I use large nuggets of aged pine bark. So that's about 60% of my mix. And then some fine to medium aged pine bark. It's about 15%. And then a blend of coconut chip and coconut peat, 15%, and then some coarse coal ash, 10%. The most important thing is you've got to think about the physical and chemical properties of what you're putting into your mix for whatever you've got available to you. You need something that's going to supply good air gaps in the pot so that the roots are not suffocated in a heavy, sloppy mix. So you want something with good air gaps, but then you also want the mix to have some moisture retention ability. You don't want it to be bone dry. And the other important thing, you need something that's going to have a long life. You don't want a mix that's going to break down in a few months or a year, because Vrieseas have a long lifespan. So the large nuggets of composted pine bark I've chosen, they have a long lifespan. They don't break down for about 2.5, 3 years. And they also create the air pockets in the mix. The fine composted pine bark and the cocoa peat, they give you the moisture retention. Now the coal ash, that's just more to adjust the pH. So that's the chemical properties of your mix. You want, a slightly below neutral, so very slightly acidic mix. And the coal ash just helps to keep the pH from getting too acidic. And it also helps to absorb toxins from the mix. So those are just some of the components I mix together. On the left, you can see the different grades of aged pine bark, and on the right, you can see the coconut chip and the coal ash. And I mix those together, and that's my mix. Seasonal change, I find where we live, where I live, most of the growth occurs in autumn, winter, and early spring. When we get very hot summer conditions, with a lot of heat waves, the growth just shuts down. But if you don't live in a climate where you have a lot of heat waves, you can probably expect to get growth throughout the year. Seasonal change also affects their color intensity. So you get some hybrids that will color better in summer, some will color better in winter, some have great color all year round. So it keeps it interesting. Pests and diseases, I think the most frequent pest for us in Queensland, and I think in a lot of parts of the world actually, is black scale or fly speck scale. I know that that exists in South Africa. I know it exists in the USA, in the mainland and in Hawaii, and it's also quite common in Australia. That's probably the worst pest of the lot. The best way to deal with that one is prevention. Just be very careful bringing new plants into your collection, quarantine them for a period of time before introducing them into your collection. If you do have an outbreak, you've got to use a good systemic insecticide like dimethoate. Very dangerous, but it does the job. And then this table that you can see is in the PDF already. You can read through it at your leisure. And that's some best practice. Again, that's in the PDF document. You can read that at your leisure. This is all based on preventing problems so that your plants look good and you don't have problems to deal with. Propagation, this is something people always ask about. Is after I've cut the pup off the mother, how long do I wait till I pot it? I used to dip them in rooting hormone powder and pot them immediately, but I've since changed that. I now dip them in rooting hormone powder and I put the pups in a net pot, like what you can see in the top right-hand corner. And I leave them in there and I water them normally until the cut callus is over and I start seeing the beginning of roots starting to form. The moment you see them starting to make little roots, then you pot them. I find if you do that, you have less problems with the establishment of the pup. So that's what I'm doing more of these days. Look at some beautiful pictures. Okay, so most of these are my own hybrids, in which case I've listed the parentage or the names of the hybrids, in which case I have noted that. So that one there is registered. That one is called Vrieseas Snow Dragon. It's been registered on the BCR. It's a beautiful plant. It's almost a meter across. Really beautiful plant. Pink Goddess is another one of my hybrids that I'm very happy with, and it's also registered. It grows to about 70 or 80 centimeters across. And again, some more of my crosses. The parentage of the one on the left is noted, and the one on the right is registered as Ilimba Rose. And now we've got a range of different hieroglyphica, Vriesea hieroglyphica hybrids. Most of these grow quite large. That's Vriesea Helen, the one that I've named after my mum. When you get further into summer, the pink coloration you can see in the leaf actually decreases and the plants become a lot whiter through summer, and the leaves in summer almost become semi-transparent. If you put your hand behind one of the leaves, you can see your fingers through the leaf. So it's quite unusual. I've never really had any other Vriesea or plant come up with leaves that are semi-transparent. Anyway, it's a really nice plant. That's Vriesea Nicholas that I named after my father. It's got lovely red and green bold coloration. It grows about 40 to 50 centimeters across. And some different siblings from Gigantea Nova crossed with Mornikia F2. different. Gigantea nova hybrid. That's Gigantea nova hybrid from John Arden in California. That's one of Arden's hybrids, Vriesea concerto. Another one of Arden's, white chestnut. And another one of Arden's, dark shadow. These are all hybrids that Pam Hyatt assisted me with exporting to Australia. So thank you very much, Pam, for your help getting these beautiful plants. Vriesea alto desiree crossed with Bianca. So what I'm also trying to do in my hybridizing is do something a little different. So a lot of the breeders around the world, for example, haven't used the species Vriesea alto desiree in breeding. So I thought, let me try and do something a bit different. So that's one of those. Now, it says there, the many faces of King David Kalakaua F2. So F2 basically means where a plant has been self-pollinated. Kalakaua is a Hawaiian hybrid, and it's a hybrid of 2 species. And King David Kalakaua F2 is do that you get a huge variation in the resulting seedlings. So it's quite interesting what can happen, which are really interesting. And in this hybrid, there's just species. So it's quite amazing, quite amazing to think of the genetics of these plants. If just 2 species can give you all this variation. Another one of my crosses, Vriesea Patrice crossed with Twilight. So Patrice is a David Shiggy hybrid and Twilight is a John Arden hybrid. And another one of my ones, that's Pahoa Beauty crossed back onto Gigantea Sideliana. These are different Vriesea hybrids. So Vriesea and Vriesea. Now the genus Vriesea used to be Vriesea as well, but the taxonomists decided to separate Vriesea into its own.
Hey, George, you seem to be having problems with audio again.
So these plants are now considered intergeneric hybrids. I might just stop talking for a little while. So it is a plant with great foliage, but also a
George?
inflorescence. So achieved that. So far, the foliage is very good. Yes. Yes, Paul.
George, I think your audio is breaking up pretty bad right now.
Okay. Should I perhaps stop the screen sharing for a moment and then restart it?
Okay, you can try that.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to help.
Well, it helped last time.
No, this is ISP problems. It's coming and going.
Okay.
Has nothing to do with George.
I'm sharing again. Can you all see the screen? Are you all able to see
Yes.
the screen? Yep. Okay. I hope, see if I can get this working again. So this hybrid is Vriesea alto desiree crossed with hieroglyphica. So have done. I'm just trying to take my breeding in a slightly different direction so that it's not more of the same, you know. Blushing Goddess, that's a hybrid I produced using John Arden's Vriesea Concerto as a parent. And Vriesea Sonia is also bred from John Arden's Vriesea Concerto as a parent. Vriesea Maria, that's named after my aunt. Perfect Harmony is bred from John Arden's Vriesea Concerto as well. Does the sound a bit better now?
No, and the slides are
No.
about we're getting the slides about a minute delayed.
That's not good. That's not good. So I've shown now a few slides of David Shiggy's hybrids growing in our conditions. Most of the David Shiggy hybrids should be easily available to people in the USA. And I think to people in South Africa as well. I believe David Shiggy will export as well. More of David Shiggy's hybrids. This is an Australian hybrid now, Godzilla, that's bred by a different Australian breeder in the Brisbane area. A really beautiful green plant. And as the name suggests, it grows into a very large plant. Some of David Fell's hybrids now, he's known around the world for his variegated Vrieseas. We've luckily been able to get a few of them here in Australia. Again, a lot of David Fell's Vrieseas should be easy to access for collectors in the USA and collectors in many other countries, because I do believe David Fell will export. So if you live in a country without restrictive import laws, you should be able to get a lot of David Fell's hybrids too. And they're really great plants, really hardy, and they perform really well. And these are a few more of my hybrids again. We're nearly at the end. This hybrid that you can see now with the really dark purple foliage with the dark banding, that's recently been registered on the BCR as Vriesea Purple Goddess. It's a large plant, grows to about 1.1 meters across. I'm really happy with it. These are a few other hybrids. And this one here called Wildfire Dream is an Australian hybrid bred by Cheryl Basic. The front is an Australian hybrid produced by Jacob Koning, and at the back, Pride of Hilo, that's a Shiggy, David Shiggy hybrid. And these are some New Zealand hybrids. These are the ones that don't like the hot weather. Oh, sorry, that's one of my hybrids again. They're all a bit mixed up, a bit mixed together. Another one of my crosses. And that's another New Zealand hybrid. Beautiful plant, but doesn't like the heat, unfortunately. However, I'm finding if I breed these New Zealand hybrids with pure species or with Hawaiian or with John Arden hybrids, you get the really great color in the offspring, but without the issues with the hot weather. So we'll see what happens there. And that's the end of the presentation, and can take questions now if you like.
It was fantastic. Such beautiful pictures and so informative. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
And if you could turn on your video now.
Turn on my video. Okay. Should I stop the screen sharing as well?
Well, it's up to you.
Leave it on.
Leave it on? Okay.
Look how pretty it is.
Start video. Okay, my video should be back on.
Yes.
There you are.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Fire away.
I have one question right away. How big is your nursery? How many square meters, or is it a hectare?
The property is 2 acres, but the actual shade structures where I grow the plants, they cover about 2,500 square meters. So about half an acre, just over half an acre.
20,000 square feet or so.
Yes, around that.
Very nice.
Keeps me out of trouble.
So you mentioned a systemic that you use to control brown scale or black scale. Is that something we can get here in the United States?
I'm not sure. You'd have to usually just do a Google search under the active ingredient. And so the active ingredient is dimethoate. It should be on the PDF. So what I would do is go into Google, enter dimethoate product label USA. Or if you're in South Africa, dimethoate product label South Africa. And if it's available in your country, it should bring up a local product label, and that would be a good starting point to locate it.
Thank you.
But dimethoate in Australia used to be available to the general public in all nurseries and hardware stores. It's now been restricted only to horticulture and agricultural trade, and you've got to buy it in big quantities. The reason for that is that it is so dangerous. So if you do get your hands on some of these, yes, they are very good at doing what they do. They will solve your problem, but you must exercise extreme caution and wear, proper protective clothing. Otherwise, it might not just be the scale insects that get affected. So be very careful.
Thank you.
I've been able to get it or in the past, and I've used it. It's very effective for everything from mites, spider mites, to just about everything. It really makes a big difference, but it smells terrible for weeks afterwards. And you're right, you have to wear respirators, complete coverage, and be really careful.
Exactly.
But it's effective.
Is it systemic?
It's a systemic and topical. It's a little bit of an oil base, but it doesn't seem to damage any of the plants.
And
I find it's best to use it when the weather's not going to be very hot. If you're expecting very hot weather, I would not advise using it.
Right.
use it on all Tillandsias and Vrieseas and Neos, any of them?
Yep,
I've
you can use
used
it on all of them.
What I would probably do is obviously follow the dosage recommended on the label. Don't exceed it because you will hurt your plants. But what I would recommend is maybe do a small test treatment to see how your plants respond, because you don't want to accidentally get the dosage wrong and you treat all your plants and you end up killing your whole collection. It is potent. It does do the job. But if you exercise those preventative methods that I've listed in PDF document, then you should limit the need to even use these chemicals in the first place.
I've sometimes mixed dimethoate with triac, which is a neem oil.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also a very good combination.
I've tried neem oil on its own, and it does work well too. Again, I wouldn't use anything with a lot of oil in it in summertime. In winter, no problem, but in summer,
Correct.
in our conditions anyway, I avoid them. Pam, have you used Crown insecticide at all?
No, I'm not familiar
No.
with that one.
It's a fairly new systemic that's come up here, and its main claim to fame, or main claims to fame, are that you only need a very small amount, and that it's very low toxicity to mammals, well, to non-invertebrates. So I've tried it, and it does deal with most scale insect species very effectively too. So that might be another option for people to use if they're very concerned about safety. It's a little less dangerous than dimethoate.
All right, I'll look it up.
So
What's it called?
Crown insecticide.
So I have a question for you.
Yes.
John Arden, his big goal in life was to create a beautiful Vriesea hybrid and your hybrids are beautiful. I haven't seen them in many years. The last time I was there, they were all young seedlings. So they've really developed into beautiful colors. And that was John's goal, was to get that type of foliage marking, but to have a tall branched inflorescence with red coloring. So are you able to do that? He was never able to accomplish that goal because you're mixing the green Vrieseas that have the beautiful red spikes with the most of the foliage Vrieseas have a cobra-like spike.
Yes.
No color to it, just kind of spotted. And so his goal was to put those two together. And I'm just wondering if you have been able to achieve that.
I'm working towards it. The closest results that I've had to that have always been with an intergeneric. So a Vriesea with, say, a Goodyear, or a Vriesea with a Tillandsia, which is a bit hard because those tend to be dead ends as far as breeding is concerned. You can't breed further with them because they tend to be sterile.
Mm-hmm.
But with pure Vrieseas, where you can still continue the breeding and refining further, I haven't quite got there yet. I am working on it, but I haven't got there.
Yeah. I remember him being so frustrated. He would spend so many years trying and trying.
I'm finding when you do, like, you think you're doing one cross to enhance the inflorescence because you think you've now got the foliage where you want it, then you end up getting a better inflorescence at the expense of the foliage. And then you do another back crossing to try and improve the foliage and retain the inflorescence. And I find you end up, it's either you gain one and lose the other. I can't seem to get it where they will keep both. That's the problem I'm running into, but we'll get there eventually.
Pam, do you mean in other words like a spike, like the Dutch or the Belgian hybrid Splendide, the very large one? I think it's
Yes.
more of a Goodyear or a Lutheria, but it's
Sure,
it's
a
got
tall branched,
Yeah.
spike that's branched with either red or orange or nice
Red, orange.
coloration.
Yeah. Okay.
The majority of the banded Vrieseas don't have any color in their inflorescence.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they're usually simple, whereas I think Hieroglyphica has a little more branching in it, but again, it's just sort of green and not very colorful.
Yes. I might see, I think I've got some images. I don't know if you guys can see my screen. I'll show you the ones that are the closest to achieving that I've bred. Let me find them. Hope I've got them. See if I can find them. There we go.
While you're doing that, if anybody goes to chat, Jean put a link to the PDF. And what I did is I just did a copy and paste and put it into a Word document so I can look it up. Thank you, Jean.
That's nice.
Yeah, so that one is John Arden's Vriesea Little Jewel onto Vriesea Tiger Tim. Now, the Vriesea Little Jewel is quite a cocktail that John Arden produced. It's got Vriesea Philippo-Coburgii, Vriesea Saundersi, and I believe it's got some pattern leaf Vrieseas in the mix. So it's a cocktail of everything. And then I put that onto Vriesea Tiger Tim. So that's the sort of inflorescence, and then I'll show you the foliage. Let me just find that for you. That's the rosette just as it's coming into bud. I don't know if that's displaying on your screen. It should be like a red and green.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let me try now. Do the screen sharing again. Share.
George, we're just in a lag. There's just a
Oh.
lag between when you set things up and we see them.
Oh, is that what it is?
Well, it has to travel a long distance.
Yeah. So there it should show now on the screen.
Yes,
Yep.
it is.
So that's the sort of foliage, and then you get the big branched yellow spike. So that's the closest I've got to it so far.
That's nice.
Maybe one day.
Well, you know, Herb Hill out in Florida has been for, I don't know, 20 years working on the small, highly developed, the green leaf Vrieseas with the highly developed, smaller, colorful branching spikes, and has had huge success with those. And he is, of course, working very closely with Bach and other kinds of large-scale European growers, mainly licensing his plants. Maybe at some point I'll find a way to do a presentation on his stuff. They're the other end of the spectrum from yours. Yours are stunningly beautiful pattern leaves, stunning. And
Thank
it was a spectacular presentation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So any more questions?
I have another question. How many people does it take to keep up with what you're doing?
Thankfully, bromeliads are quite forgiving if you're in the right climate. So 90% of the time, it's just me. But in the last 12 months, I have taken on one person to help with pulling out weeds and filling up pots and things like that. But yeah, most of the time, it's just me. I have taken on an online sales manager, which was the person that used to help with pulling out weeds and filling up pots. But I thought it would be better to put them in charge of online sales because they were really good at that. So yeah, most of the time, it's just the two of us.
Are any of your online sales available for shipment to here in the United States?
Yes, I can do it. But I think from the cost perspective of actually getting plants shipped to another country, you'd probably be better off joining up with a few collectors and doing a joint import, or waiting until I found a nursery, say in the US, who was willing and able to, say, do an import and then make the plants available, locally in the US without all the import-export hassle, to local collectors. So,
Well, one of the key peak problems importing here is that, and very similar to your own ag department, our ag department loves to try to find problems and gas your plants to death. So
Yep.
the problem is, unless the material is totally clean, you're going to lose the entire shipment because they're going to gas it. It's
Yes.
very difficult, can be very expensive, especially
Yes.
shipping from Australia. But I like your long-term plan. For those of us who are elderly collectors, I'm afraid we'll have to enjoy your photos.
Well, you never know. You never know. I have done, I think I've done 1 or 2 shipments to the US. That was to Pam. Pam, is it 1 or 2 shipments? I can't remember. It was some years ago.
You're on mute, Pam.
I don't think she heard you.
Oh, okay.
I did hear. I think
Oh.
2.
2. Yeah, and they went well. There was some issue with the wording of the permit. And there were
Correct.
no other issues though. Yeah, so it can be done. Any other questions?
I have one more question for you. Have you looked into or is there any kind of future for you in cloning or in mirror cloning or in propagation by laboratory?
I was approached by Buck when he was here for the recent Australian conference, but I believe he visited quite a few of the local breeders, but we haven't heard anything again since. At this point, it wouldn't be worthwhile for me to take on like a tissue culture contract from my end if I was to fully instigate it myself, just with the costs involved versus, you know, the likely return. I probably wouldn't, the numbers probably wouldn't add up, not for collectors' plants.
George, I have a question. I may have missed what you, the details on it, but you had a slide that talked about feeding, and you liked it to be a gradual increase over 12 months. What fertilizer is that you're talking about? Because, you know, if you pick up most fertilizers, I don't know if they give you that information.
Yes. Damn, I should have thought to take a photo of the packaging. It's called Scott's Professional. It is kind of, it falls under Osmocote, but then it's called Scott's Professional Osmocote, 12 to 14 month. And on the side of the packaging, it has a graph. I'll just show you what the graph looks like. So you should
just so you know, our retail Osmocote here, it only lasts 90 days.
Oh,
that's at 72 degrees.
That might work for your Neos, but not for your Vrieseas and Tillandsias. So where I buy this from is not the general garden center. I go to a horticultural cooperative, and you buy it in, I think, 15 or 20 kilogram bags. So what collectors around here do is they might go and buy a bag and share it amongst 5 or 6 of them for their purposes, if you're not a commercial grower.
It's available here. It's just it's through professional supply.
Well, I think the best thing then maybe is team up with a few collectors and buy a bag and share it out. It's worthwhile. You know, it really is good stuff. Or you can just apply the 9-month fertilizer twice at a 9-month interval, but then that's more work. It's entirely up to you how you want to do it. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, yeah, thank you very much for having me give this presentation.
Great presentation, George. Thank you.
Thank you.
Spectacular. Thank you.
Very good.
House.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
It was wonderful, George. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Absolutely excellent. Excellent.
I enjoyed every minute, George.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
We want
Thank
you
you,
back here in South Africa.
Thank you. It was excellent. And
Somebody in the chat said they want you back to South Africa.
Yeah, I think I might feel like a bit of a foreigner now if I went back after all this time.
No, we'll welcome
see.
you back.
Thank you. Okay, guys. Well, thank you again.
See
Have
you.
a nice
Bye-bye.
evening, everybody.
Thank you, George.
Yes,
You're
sir.
welcome.